Uh-huh. Okay.
Now you're recording. Yeah, good.
We are recording, so Sid in New York, you made it, right? Now that we have a Sid and a Syed. Hello, Chris. Okay. I guess so. Mr. Smith, I see practice improvements. Is that you, or is Mr. Frost also with us?
Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Okay, I just unmuted practice improvements. And
hey, good morning, Richard.
Good morning. Good morning, good morning. Well, for a last minute notice, we got about a dozen people here. So thank you everyone for showing up. We're gonna keep this fairly brief because Mr. Smith is a very busy man. But he offered to spend a little time with us, and I thought that he could give you folks just a little picture, having, being one of the experts in the industry that most people don't even know anything about. It's not even an industry yet, but the world is learning quickly, and I thought you could talk a bit about the problem that physicians out there are having, the solution that as a client of the High Performance Network we can provide to clinics, and maybe talk a little bit about some of the offices and clinics that have been on board for a while and some of the positive results that they're seeing. And then we could maybe wrap it up with a short elevator speech that I can share with everyone since we are recording this. So, Mr. Smith, you have the floor, sir.
Absolutely, thank you, and I appreciate everyone's time to gather on short notice. We had another meeting planned for this time slot that got rescheduled, and Richard asked if I had a time slot available, and I said, well, I've still got the time slot that we had, so I appreciate, again, everyone kind of huddling on short notice. At its most simplistic form, we are a service provider to primary care practices, and we are selling a business model that we call proactive primary care. And it is the difference between reactively treating patients and proactively managing patients. And in the new world of healthcare reform and pay for performance and accountable care, we solve their biggest problem. So I'll just hit a couple quick bullet points, and then I'll show you a couple slides, and then we'll close with kind of the elevator pitch that that Richard's asking for. But proactive primary care is a better business model, better for the patient, better for the provider, and better for the practice. It is completely non-disruptive to their daily operations, which is really important to them. Everything that's out there in the industry seems to really disrupt their daily operations. So emphasizing it being non-disruptive. As far as revenue enhancements go, we target 2x PCP revenues in 12 to 24 months. That timeline is dependent on two things, one being their payer mix, and two being their willingness to let us move quickly with some of our revenue enhancing service things. If they, slow some of those operations or limit those operations, obviously, the timeline can be extended. But we have dozens upon dozens of proven examples of primary care providers that we've been able to double their revenues. And then we work in a 100% pay for performance environment. So if we don't add significant value to the practice, they don't owe us a dime. And by the way, this hasn't happened yet. So I've got 3 slides I'll get into real quick. This being just a cover slide, I don't go over it, but basically asking the practice if they're interested in significantly enhancing their practice revenues while lowering overall, while increasing overall quality of care. Kind of a redundant expected yes. The next 3 slides I'll slow down. I don't normally slow down at this level with the practices, but I do think it's important that you guys fully appreciate the magnitude of the problem that these practices have. So these are the industry problems, and then I'll show you how the industry is solving those problems with new healthcare legislation, and then I'll show you what problems and opportunities that creates for the practices. So the first thing is, in 2012, we all saw the Affordable Care Act come out. The Affordable Care Act is basically two-sided. One side is all about, Obamacare and giving new insurance cards, and the other side is about really quality of care. A lot of upside incentives, very little downside risk. But through the Obamacare side, you saw almost 10,000 people get issued insurance cards, or 10 million people be issued new insurance cards. And then you look at the baby boomer generation and the rate of retirement today, which is at groundbreaking trends for the United States. They're printing almost 10,000 new Medicare insurance cards on the daily basis, and they expect that trend to continue for the next 20 years. So problem number one is you got a whole heck of a lot more people that the country is now responsible for covering the cost of their medical expenses. The second thing is the average cost per person is rising much faster than the rate of inflation or gross domestic product. It's expected to go from $10,000 to $15,000 per patient per year over the next 8 years. So when you look at the economics of a significantly higher number of people holding government insurance cards and the cost of those people rising significantly, you're seeing total U.S. spend on healthcare going from a little over $500 billion per year to more than doubling to over $1 trillion per year over that same time period. So a huge problem that our country simply cannot afford. So it's having to be more aggressive with how to control those costs. Adding to that complexity, you've got a limited number of primary care providers. So, there's estimations as much as 100,000 being the national shortage of PCPs. And then when you look at the quality of care, CNBC International did a report of the 11 sophisticated nations, and the United States came in ranked last of the sophisticated, or what they call high-income nations, in quality of care. So, most expensive, lowest quality, our value proposition of healthcare is really broken. Why is that? And we see primary care as it stands as just a difficult business to execute. The economics are very difficult. You don't talk to very many at all PCPs that are having much success. They're either breaking even at best, losing money. Almost every hospital system, health system, regional health system, critical access hospital, they will all tell you that primary care is a loss leader. We working with a group in Des Moines, Iowa, and they have 57 primary care clinics, and they've lost $5 to $6 million a year on primary care for the last 3 consecutive years. And then it's got very difficult operations. If you look at quality scorecarding with primary care providers, they're historically very, very low in their quality of care. So what's the industry doing to solve those problems? two pieces of legislation to be aware of. We talked about the Affordable Care Act, a lot of upside incentives for docs that provide better quality of care and able to lower cost of care. But there were very little downside risk for docs that didn't perform in that environment. So you got, somewhere between 20 to 30% of docs that paid attention to the Affordable Care Act, and most of them said, it doesn't really affect me much, or there's no way I'm going to get those incentives. I'm going to ignore it. And then you've got macro legislation, which I know your team's very familiar with. Most people aren't near as educated on. They don't understand the much stiffer downside penalties for providers that do not perform within MACRA, and it applies to all of them, one way or another, either through the MIPS path or through an alternative payment model, but it applies to all the primary care docs. Implications for the docs, the ones that get it and really appreciate the opportunity that they have in a pay-for-performance environment that change their operation, can do extremely well, will do extremely well. And the ones that don't get it or ignore it or stay in their operating lanes, what we call kind of putting their head in the sand, they're going to be penalized significantly and either end up closing shop or going to work for somebody that has a proven operation. How do we help? Our business model, proactive primary care. I'll touch on them real quick. So we run a GEICA program, gap in care analysis. We do annual wellness visits. We do the advanced care planning, the chronic care management, and the transitional care management. So what does that mean? We will go into a practice and we will execute a business associate agreement, just a HIPAA compliant data use agreement, where we can go into their EMR, extract their EMR data, and look at all of the evidence-based guidelines, standards of care, gaps in care. And I'm talking about, diabetics that no eye exam, foot exam, no A1C in 6 months, etc. We also look for the patients that they have not done an annual wellness visit on, and that's usually well north of 90% of their patients have no annual wellness visit. And something important to note out of the annual wellness visit program is every credible insurance plan, period. Every credible insurance plan must provide one free preventative service, free to the patient at no out-of-pocket expense to the patient annually. So that piece of legislation we really utilize as a foundation to getting patients in once a year at no cost to the patient, doing what we call a comprehensive risk assessment on those patients, identifying their unique health risks, which is obviously different from one patient to another, and then giving the primary care provider a plan of attack to close those gaps in care. So we built proprietary technology that we use. It's very efficient in the comprehensive risk assessment. It prints out a color-coded, user-friendly one-pager that the doc can look at and just address the things in orange and red, which are the medium and high risk factors. We also do the advanced care planning, which is a reimbursable service. In other words, insurance companies pay for that. Advanced care planning is a 5-year preventative care plan based on age, gender, reported conditions, and then for the specific patients that it applies to, special needs, closer to end of life, we can go into their DNR and medical directorship type things. But again, that's for a subset of the population. And then for the patients that have 2 or more chronic conditions, so if they have a cardiovascular condition and diabetes, or 2 cardiovascular conditions, which is really common, blood pressure and cholesterol, they are eligible for a chronic care management health coaching service that we basically keep up with the well-being of those patients when those patients are outside that doc's exam room. And docs love that service because they've always wanted a chronic disease management program, and it's just very costly and they haven't found ways to get paid for it. And then the last thing being a transitional care management. So identifying patients that have been discharged from the hospital and reaching out to those patients and scheduling them for a PCP follow-up. Again, another reimbursable service. What makes that unique is, take, for example, a congestive heart failure patient that's discharged from the hospital, by reaching out to that patient and scheduling them for a PCP encounter within 30 days is a 72% reduction in hospital readmissions. So, relatively low cost to the insurance company, and very high reward when you consider, the average inpatient hospitalization is around $20,000 to $28,000 depending on the region. So that's kind of our 1, 2, 3. Who we are, the industry's problem and how they're solving that problem with legislation, and then what our services are. Proactive primary care, and we work in a pay-for-performance relationship with the practices, which is, again, non-disruptive to their daily operations, really a strategic bolt-on. And then we take them to 2 times revenue in a pay-for-performance relationship. So let me just pause for a second. Richard, did I effectively cover the things that you wanted me to, or do you want me to go into a little further of how we do it and some testimonials? Or
Yeah, that'd be good. Just both those 2 things.
Okay, so how we do it, don't make this a software sale, but do know that we've built proprietary tools that make our job much more efficient. We call it ITAR. It stands for a circular process of identifying gaps, tracking, attacking, and reporting gap closure. So it is a tool set that we use that's a circular process that never ends, executed in 5 individual pieces of software, or portals that we call them, integrated together. So we have our patient health dashboards that we track internally. This is nothing you have to train the clinics or the docs on. We have the patient level detail, the identifiers and the scheduling portal. And then we also have what I talked about with the intelligent reporting, which is very user friendly to the docs. When they see that, they go, oh, what a time saver. It takes me 20, 25 minutes to write these care plans. You've got all the evidence-based guideline algorithms. If you click diabetes, it automatically promotes eye exam, foot exam, A1C every 6 months, so on and so forth. Men over the age of X, women over the age of Y, gender irrelevant over the age of Z. All of those algorithms are already built to pull what the evidence-based guideline standards of care are for their patients, and they appreciate the timeliness of those tools. What's our value proposition? I talked about, our goal is to take primary care docs to 2 times revenue, and that is not in a what we call a vulture service. That is in a value-based service of the things that we're doing that, granted, cost the system money, come back to the system in a significant return on investment. The things that we're doing with primary care providers reduces hospitalizations, emergency room encounters, unnecessary, avoidable specialty visits, etc. So significant ROI to the system. Immediate increase in their quality of care to their patients, both from a feel-good perspective and from a competitiveness of representation of quality in kind of the MIPS scoring of increasing their representation of the quality of service that they provide. And essentially, kind of what I mentioned before, we transition that business model from reactively treating patients to proactively managing those patients. And that's a significant change. People don't usually respect how difficult that is to execute. To really change a business model at that scale, it takes people, processes, and technology, and they're not prepared to execute in that way. So that's really our value proposition. There's also the additional benefits of all the things we talked about, the lowering hospitalizations and emergency room utilization, etc. Here's a case study. I won't read it to you, but essentially we took a normal, or what I would consider a normal 2-doc practice. So 2 docs working 4.5 days a week, taking 3 or 4 weeks of vacation apiece. The 2 of those docs together were grossing just under $1 million. So we implemented our gap in care analysis program, decided we were going to start with the Medicare annual wellness visits, started doing the annual wellness visits, identifying patients that qualified for the telephonic health coaching or the chronic care management service, identifying patients that were applicable for the advanced care plans, got that stable. And then we came back and looked at, this really doesn't need to be a Medicare only program. We really can take this payer agnostic with this practice now. Started doing their Medicaid well child visits, started doing their commercial insurance physicals, or the self-funded employers, what they call health risk assessments. And then finally, summer rolled around, the practice had some capacity. We started looking at the emergency room utilization. We started looking at hospital discharges and chronic disease patients that hadn't been in 6 months, and scheduling those back to the PCP and the time they wanted to be there seeing patients. And we essentially were able to double the gross revenue to the practice and more than double the net profits with that practice. There's the case study, and I'll just pause and catch my breath and let you read some testimonials.
For those of you that are listening, I'm going to read these while Mr. Smith catches his breath. The first one says, Practice Improvements Company gave us the plug-and-play plan and tools and all the coaching needed to provide early and easy success in effective care management and a higher level of patient-centric practice that our homebrew attempt simply couldn't achieve. The HPN team's vast experience, service ethic, and strong technical support every step of the way from plan to implementation and beyond brings new meaning to the word partner. I have never experienced a more authentic and productive collaboration for the benefit of our patients, our clinicians, and our organization. Never. Nick and his team exceed all expectations, making the difficult task of practice transformation and exhilarating innovation that sets us apart. And that's signed by Dr. Randall Tobler, CEO of a hospital. There's another one. Working with PIC gives our practice a unique vehicle by which we can improve the quality of patient care while simultaneously lowering the cost of care in the group of patients that participate, generating new benefits for all involved. Another one says, as the owner of an independent internal medicine clinic, I've been looking for a solution like PIC for over 15 years. On that note, if you could talk briefly about why the CMS and the insurance companies are behind spending this extra money now because of the savings to the future. I think that would be important to touch upon.
Yeah, so just conceptually, I understand the buckets. So if you're Medicare, and I've been on the payer side, that's kind of where I started my career, you understand the buckets of healthcare. So you got primary care, you got multi-spec practices, specialty practices, you've got obviously the emergency room department visits and the hospitalizations, you've got the ambulatory surgical, you've got what I would consider the pharmacy bucket. There's a lot that goes into that, and then you've got a lot that goes into what I would consider the end-of-life bucket, whether that's skilled nursing facility, home health, hospice, long-term care, etc. So just understand the buckets of healthcare. So within those buckets, that bucket is not getting, the insurance companies do not want that bucket to get bigger. They don't want to go from spending $500 billion to spending over $1 trillion. That's not their desire. Their desire is to shift where they're spending that money. So away from the hospitalizations and the emergency room department and the unnecessary specialty, which payers or insurance companies define that as high cost, low value care. So where they want to spend the money is with primary care, because that's where you have the opportunity for cost avoidances. So they want to incentivize primary care practices to do wellness and preventative care management services that reduce ER hospitalizations, avoidable specialty, and ultimately delays or the very high cost of end of life care, which is where, 70-75% of our total cost of care in our lifetime will go. So being able to delay those expenditures, being able to reduce the frequent flyers in the emergency room, being able to reduce the readmits in the hospital, things of that nature come at a significant return on investment for, a couple $100 primary care encounters. So that's really the strategic benefit of these wellness and preventative services, is it comes at a substantial return on investment to who's paying for those services.
Oh, and maybe you could just talk about some of the specific cases or examples of clinics that we've been very successful with.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my background is kind of in an entrepreneurial venture, stepped out of the self-funded health plan consulting world, and we stood up 28 primary care clinics, hired 42 physicians, and we executed this better primary care model in a era we called kind of figuring it out, from 2007 to 2011. And then as we stepped out of that operating business, we sold that business to a company in Atlanta. As we looked at the Affordable Care Act being published, we started going and consulting for primary care practices. And I will be really honest with you, we lost a lot of money telling practices what they needed to do better. They would agree with you unanimously, no pushback. All the practices would agree, yes, patients that are going to the emergency room multiple times without PCP encounters need to be seen. Yes. Yes. Diabetics that haven't been seen in 6 months need to be seen. Absolutely. But they would not proactively reach out and close those gaps. They'd give it to Susie at the front desk. She'd have 200 patients on a list. She'd call through, 15 or 20 of them, or she'd call through at one time, and then she'd get busy and distracted. And it takes a dedicated day in, day out, continuous effort, because that list isn't stagnant. That list is always filling, and you're always getting patients off that list. So it's not a check the box and we're done thing. It is a new operation that takes new people, new process, and new technology. So because of that, practices just did not have any success with that. Where we experienced a lot of success is fast forwarding to 2015, when I sat around a table with my team and said, it's difficult for me to keep losing money in this consultative role. We really need to proactively stand up these services for these practices in a revenue sharing relationship. So 100% pay for performance. They don't have to execute on these things. They're not doing well with it anyway. We will do it for them, and we will share in the new revenue. They get 100% of what they've got historically, and we will share in the new revenue streams that we create with them. And that business model has really taken off. So we grew, throughout Arkansas, and then into Oklahoma, and then into Kentucky, and then back north into Missouri, and now Mississippi, Alabama. We just executed a contract last week for maybe this week for Georgia. We've also got several practices coming on board in the Newark, New Jersey, Princeton, New Jersey, Hackensack, New Jersey, and New York markets with a strategic partnership that we've got going in there. And then we're also standing up services for some critical access hospitals, rural health systems in Texas. And then we're also standing up for a very large health system in Des Moines, Iowa. They've got 57 clinics and over 200 primary care providers. So we've really hit a spot of really exciting exponential growth right now. I think we're solving a problem that is a really big problem that practices don't know how to solve on their own, or they're trying to solve it on their own, and they're having very little success with that.
Thank you. And if you could maybe just, if you were talking to somebody who was here for their first day, how would you tell them to introduce themselves and what we do in a short elevator speech?
Yeah, so I would try to connect with the practice, just my style, and I'd ask them, if they're worried about their business model and how it fits into the industry with the, healthcare reform shifts. I ask them if they're informed and prepared for MACRA. They understand that significant penalties are coming down the pipe for non-performing doctors, and this pretty much applies to every primary care practice out there. In a time of accountable care and pay for performance and value-based contracting, they interested in a pay for performance solution that's very proven, non-disruptive to their daily operations. It is absolutely better for their patients, which is very important to them, better for the providers and better for the practice. We target 2 times PCP revenues in 100% pay for performance relationship. Would they, have a meeting with us and let us demonstrate how we do that?
Thank you, sir. Anything else you think would be of value for somebody who's just getting started going out there?
I would encourage folks to keep it simple. I think respectfully, less is more. It's a very complicated market as a whole. You'll experience a lot of, out of the box questions, but, not to shake the confidence and just believe wholeheartedly that we have a great value proposition that is, 100% pay for performance. And it is absolutely better for the patients. It is in no way, shape, or form taking advantage of patients. It's in no way, shape, or form taking advantage of the practice. It is a value-based relationship that we add substantial value to the practice, substantial value to the quality of life of the patient, no out-of-pocket expense to the patient, and 100% pay for performance. It is that simple. And at that point, you're asking for a commitment to, jump on a quick call and learn about successes that we're having with other practices. Usually people are very willing. If you don't say, hey, are you interested in buying this service, you'll get hesitation. But if you say, hey, are you willing to, jump on a quick call with the people that are actually doing this and, let them tell you about the successes that they're having with practices, usually people are, yeah, I'd like to hear about what other people are doing. And I think you'll get a higher success or penetration of that.
You just cut out there, sir. Can you hear me?
I can. Where'd you lose me?
No, I just, it was maybe a sentence ago. I just unmuted a gentleman in Texas that I've been speaking with. He's got, provides software to a large amount of doctors. Kevin, you got a quick question?
Do I have a quick question? I
Sure.
don't. No. So
Okay.
A lot of what's been said, I absolutely. It's exciting to me because these are some of the conversations that I have on a day in, day out basis with providers across the country, and some are actively looking for ways to be proactive with accountable care. Others know that it exists. They know they've got an issue. They don't have a plan to attack it and do it in a meaningful way. So, man, this is exciting. I appreciate you inviting me to this.
I'm happy to do so. All right. Well, look, I know that time is valuable in these busy times for the High Performance Network. So I want to thank you, Mr. Smith, and look forward to getting some of those new marketing pieces that we discussed. Thank you, everyone.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Make it an awesome day, folks. This call is officially
My
over.
pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Yes, sir.